Hey AP World, I'm Miss Ziegler, and today we're going to be talking about migration during imperialism. So, title your notes and let's get going. First bullet point I want you to put is the causes of migration. This comes from 6.6 in your AMSCO book if you're reading along and following in your AMSCO book. Under causes of migration, what I want you to put down is migration through labor systems. This happens because of the demand for low wage labor, which will usually lead to the exploitation of resources in those areas. The second bullet point with this one is the recruitment of workers. Where are these workers coming from? Labor is coming from India, and they will migrate to the British colonies, such as the Caribbean, Africa, and Fiji. Chinese laborers are also coming from China and going to California and Malaya. They will help build railroads and work on farms. There are also Japanese laborers who are coming, and they will move to Hawaii, Peru, and Cuba to work on plantations. Let's talk for a minute the difference between slavery and the types of coerced labor that arise from imperialism. Slavery is mostly abolished in the 19th century. However, there's still a demand for labor, and so imperialists begin to use coerced labor in the form of these three systems. The first one is indentured servants. This is where the person would work for a number of years to pay off debt. They may have a beneficiary who pays for their transportation, and then they'll work for that person for a certain number of years while that debt is being paid off. The second form is Asian contract laborers. This is where Chinese and Indian laborers were forced or tricked into servitude. It's a very difficult life and unjust treatment. They're often exploited and they work for very low wages. Fortunately, there was some media pressure that was put on the countries that were using this type of coerced labor, and it's eventually banned in Britain, the United States, Spain, and Portugal. The third system is the penal colonies. This happens when the British ship convicts to Australia, where they would perform hard labor and endure bad treatment. Convicts could earn their freedom after several years, and most of the time they stayed in Australia to continue their life. The French will also use this system. Migration in the face of challenges. So sometimes migration would happen because of bad living conditions wherever you are presently living. And this happens because of different things such as the potato famine in Ireland, which is what this picture is representing. In that case, the people would go on what was called a diaspora. That refers to the mass immigration from one country to another. It's usually in result of poverty, political conditions, or famine. And this happens in several places during this time period. As I said before, the potato famine in Ireland will push many Irish out to look for better living conditions, usually in the United States. Let's talk about some of the specifics as to why people would migrate. Many of the Chinese people are leaving because of bad conditions in China, and they go to the U.S. as indentured servants. They will be instrumental in building the Transcontinental Railroad in the U.S., as well as they participate in the gold rush as well. Then we have India. India is facing widespread poverty at this time, and many go elsewhere to look for other opportunities. They will work as indentured servants on plantations. As mentioned before, Ireland is having political troubles because they want to become a part of Britain, and there's some of the Irish that don't want to become a part of Britain. So during this time, not only were they having political troubles, but they also endured the Great Famine, where the potato crop is destroyed, and over 3 million Irish immigrated from Ireland. They went to Great Britain, and they also went to the U.S. to build canals and railroads. We have immigration happening from Italy, and this is also to escape poverty. They mostly went to the Americas, Australia, and New Zealand. Specifically, many went to Argentina because there were better wages there and because Argentina was pro-immigration. Let's talk a little bit about the effects of the migration. One effect was the changes in home societies. Mostly migrants were more male than female, and so there was a shift in females taking on the male role back in the home societies when the males left. In some places, male relatives would look after the family while the head of the household was gone, but in other societies, women took leadership roles. Sometimes women would follow their husband and later immigrate, and other times males would send money home to their family. We also see ethnic enclaves rise up. These are neighborhoods of people from the same country. So, for example, Little Italy, Chinatown, they speak the same language, they eat the same food, and they share the same culture. If you've never been to our Chinatown here in Houston, it's pretty interesting to go down there and check it out. Several Chinese enclaves were established in California, as many Chinese went there after helping with the railroad, and they found work on farms, mines, or participated in the gold rush. And so these ethnic enclaves are going to spring up throughout the United States, but specifically in California for those reasons. The downside of migration was the prejudice and discrimination that happens in the US. In California specifically, they were discriminated against, and it was prohibited for them to be hired within some jobs. The US would later pass the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. This banned further Chinese immigration to the US. It was limited at first, and then it became permanent. It was later repealed in 1943. And you can see with this political cartoon here that the Golden Gate of Liberty, this would be like going into the United States. They're not allowed to go in. Notice all of these people can go in, but not the Chinamen. And we know that communists were really hated at the time, but they're still allowed in. Hoodlums are allowed in. Socialists are allowed in. Everybody except the Chinamen. This was a result of prejudice and discrimination, and they blamed it on the fact that they didn't want the Chinese to steal jobs from the American people, which sounds a little bit familiar to the reason why some people argue, even today, why immigrants should not be allowed to come in. There was also prejudice and discrimination in Australia. They passed what was called the Chinese Immigration Act, which limited the number of Chinese who could come ashore. And because of the competition for jobs, they also put in place the White Australia policy, which was passed in 1901. All non-British immigrants were banned, and this stayed in place until the mid-1970s. So it wasn't just in the United States that this discrimination was happening. It was also happening in other places where these workers migrated. And that wraps up our notes for today. Thank you so much for watching. And if you haven't done so yet, make sure and subscribe and turn on those notifications so that you don't miss a thing. I'll see you next time.